All right, everybody. I just got done filming with the Holistic Savage, Dean Vermeire. He is a force to be reckoned with. No, but really, this is somebody that I serendipitously ran into. I think it was like last Christmas, around the seasons last year, at the gym. He was wearing a tank top, said Holistic Savage on it, and I was like, "This guy's in great shape. He has holistic written on him. I got to go talk to him." So I did, and the conversation just started flowing. We swapped informations back and forth, and we've kind of been in contact ever since. And so I've been waiting to get him on this podcast because he has such a wealth of knowledge. He has a very touching story of kind of how he got into this field, working with practitioners, working with patients, and really leaning into research. So this podcast is going to kind of be like me talking to me in a way, because he has such a wealth of knowledge like this. We're going to talk about psychedelics. We talk about mold toxicity. We talk about supplements, testing, what he recommends as well for like your annual physical in terms of tests. So be sure, strap in, listen the entire way through. And thank you again for joining us on the podcast, and enjoy this interview with the Holistic Savage. All right, everybody. So we're here with Dean Vermeire over here, the Holistic Savage, who that's actually how I met you. You were in the gym, you were at Lifetime, and you just so happened to be at the gym wearing a tank top, and you were jacked. And I'm like, Holistic Savage, he's built. I'm like, I got to talk to this dude. So, so here we are now. I get to interview you, but thank you for being on the show and taking the time out today.
No, thanks for having me, brother. I'm looking forward to this. I mean, it was kind of serendipitous. I'm just in Arizona with my girlfriend for Christmas and the holidays. And of course, being a Lifetime whore, I got to find like the local club to go get my pump on. And then I see this, fellow functional bro. And so I'm sure this is just the start of a long functional brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how did you get called into the functional space? How did you get into all this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably no surprise, background nutrition fitness, right? So when I was, going through high school, I grew up doing a lot of martial arts, combat sports. That was my passion, my first real passion in life. And so then that somehow mutated in my head. At one point I wanted to be like a UFC fighter when I grew up. And that seemed not very practical or realistic. So I was like, Navy SEAL, like that's a much more practical
sure
idea. Yeah, it made sense at the time, right? And so after high school, I qualified for the SEAL program, signed away my life on a 6-year contract. But then in week 3 of boot camp, they found I had a pre-existing injury, so they have to medically discharge you. It's not their liability, right? If it was pre-existing. So that was kind of a hard blow, because it's like, here I am, this young high school graduate trying to figure out life. Academia didn't really resonate with me. I didn't want to be a college kid and, jump through the hoops of academia, make the grade, get shit faced on the weekend. Like, that's just not me.
Yeah.
I was too focused, too disciplined. So the gym that I was working at, which is, my local Lifetime Fitness, I was a janitor at the gym from, 17, 18. Obviously worked out there heavily. So all the trainers knew me, and I always kind of looked up to these like buff, people in black uniforms. So they gave me a shot. So I got certified NASM in precision nutrition, really started my more formal career. And I just absolutely fell in love with just, metabolic physiology and biochemistry, all the sciencey stuff. I mean, the job was make people feel good, take them through workouts, count their reps, teach them how to build a plate of food. But I was always really into more kind of the clinical science and the lab testing, the metabolic testing, program design based on that. But it was actually during that time, as a health and fitness professional, I was really struggling with my own mental health. And there's this whole tragic, long, sad story of, I tried to kill myself with an overdose and woke up in the ICU, went through, psychiatric wards and saw firsthand just how archaic and dysfunctional the conventional psychiatric model is. Okay. And that wasn't even really my rock bottom. I then was in this horribly toxic codependent relationship, and where this is all going is she got this mysterious illness. And this is kind of where the whole plot sort of turns a little bit, because nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. And at the time, we were engaged. I was, planning on spending the rest of my life with this woman. And yes, like the relationship had a lot of psycho-emotional toxicity and issues. But either way, she did have a very real illness. I watched her waste away. Her behavior just became way more volatile. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. So I was taking it upon myself to try to save her.
Sure.
And we kind of dove into a lot of, root cause functional subjects. Like we went headfirst into methylation and MTHFR. That was kind of the first one. Mm-hmm. Then, parasite cleanse, and then this and that. And, long story short, though, it played out over several years. I eventually managed to get out of the unhealthy relationship and move forward. She continued to stay ill and eventually took her life. I went on into functional medicine, and I've just been pursuing this path ever since. So super trippy journey, but here we are.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that helps to kind of propel you into what you do today. And when you have that unfortunate firsthand experience, it makes for a great story, but it makes for a great passion as well, as long as you use it, for good and not for, pulling you down. So it's very admirable, man, that you got through that. I'm glad you didn't take your life there. That would suck. Then wouldn't have been able to beat you, and you wouldn't have been able to help as many people as you have so far. So thanks for sticking around. Appreciate it.
Hey, it wasn't my choice, but it's been a very trippy journey, a beautiful one. I always like to say my work is my medicine, and I really do mean that. Like, I am kind of a workhorse by nature. I'm just a more intense, obsessive personality. So the service that I give to the collective through the work that I do, that is like my daily dose of medicine. I don't know what I would be doing otherwise. So I think there's a lot of healing that happens when you take your pain and turn it into your purpose, which, if anything, that's kind of become cliche these days, but it still has a lot of merit.
Yeah. And so how are you helping people now? What services do you offer for people? Like what are you doing?
It keeps changing like faster than I can even, really keep up with. Like, I've been building these businesses for a number of years now, but then I keep getting recruited into, honestly, just like a lot of scientific advising for other corporations is kind of where it feels like my career is pulling me. However, it's like my businesses are just now, starting to really grow their roots and gain traction. So I'm kind of juggling 50 things, but I do still work with private clients, kind of less and less, but I do the consulting, training functional medicine providers through my M.A.P program. That's really the main thing that I've been doing in recent years, the courses for functional medicine practitioners. Long term, I really just want to do just pure research and education. If I had it my way, I would just be a researcher and look at the data and then talk about it to teach people, but we'll see where it goes.
I think it's ironic in a way where, like, you look at where you were in high school and you're like, academia, I didn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And now you're like, I'd love to be able to do research. It's like the highest level of academia. So it's awesome that you've been able to find your purpose in that. And school subjects aren't necessarily for everybody, but when you find your passion, turn it on, like, get after it and learn, because it fills you up. It makes you feel good. I love doing research. I love buying books as well, even though my wife Megan thinks I'm crazy and I have too many, and that might be true for right now, but I love accumulating them so that way I can have references and continue this path of learning, because it's great.
Oh, absolutely. Just, we're supposed to be evidence-based, and what's cool about science and research, like, science is just the sort of objective pursuit of truth, and we're trying to measure and quantify things that have always existed for the most part. So there's always that gap of like what is versus our scientific understanding of it's perpetually behind, it's perpetually catching up. But especially in today's world, I feel like we've seen this bastardization of science where, science is getting bastardized into marketing and propaganda. So I feel like being able to delineate and sort of navigate through good data, good research, bad research, so that people can make informed decisions. That's kind of this mess that we're seeing, and COVID really exacerbated that, I feel.
Yeah, I think at like warp speed, that happened like overnight. The scientific method got thrown away immediately. And I'm like, what the heck? I was a biology major. I remember using like the scientific method to prove a hypothesis. And now it's like, no, it just does it. And you're like, does it though? No, just do it. Yeah, don't you dare. Yeah. Especially in this space too, when you're doing like the more holistic healing, we want that evidence-based stuff. And I feel like a lot of times, like with plants and herbs, I feel like when something's planted here, given to us, that is natural, our man-made brain can only understand so much, and we only have the technology to understand so much. I think there's so much more to it, and mainstream science will try to censor that material. If you go back, like Rockefeller, I think he banned the list of like holistic herbs, like no one's allowed to use them, and he took them and created medications out of them so he could control it. But that's maybe conspiracy theory hole, whatever, but but a segue into that. So going like the mental health side of things, obviously you dealt with that yourself, and one of the things that we kind of connected on, because not many practitioners really, in my opinion, know what they're talking about when it comes to mold toxicity. But mold toxicity is one of the things that I see with a lot of, I don't know what the heck that was. One of the things that I see, it's a celebration for me. But mold. So you dove into mold. What got you pulled into that category?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked, because with my ex-fiance, kind of playing out that story, teasing it out a little bit more than I gave. There was a very specific day, she woke up and she was supposed to drive like 3 hours for a work trip. And her kind of trapezius area was just completely locked up, like this unrelenting, like cramp from hell kind of thing. And that was literally like a very definitive starting point to just this downward spiral with her health, where she started developing a lot of like neurological, numbness, tingling, peripheral neuropathy, ice pick kind of stabbing pain that kept shifting around and moving. Obviously a lot of, cognitive and sort of neuropsychiatric stuff going on. And she also just started wasting away. Like she literally went from, healthy, fit, good body composition to then, some of her friends and family were starting to gossip of like, is she anorexic? Because she's getting like,
the muscle wasting. Yeah.
And so, I had no idea what was going on, and I was trying to research and learn and trying protocols and supplements. And, we went to medical doctor, naturopathic doctor, physiotherapist, chiropractic. None of it moved the needle at all. She was put on different muscle relaxants and medications. Nothing was really helping. And it wasn't until several years later, we had been separated, and I was really diving deep into the functional medicine world, that I got exposed to the concept of mold illness, biotoxin illness, sick building syndrome, SIRS, all the things, right? And I just remember seeing, some of the symptom clusters that are more so associated with, mycotoxicosis and mold illness. And it just, for the first time, was like, that seems like it was it. And now, to be fair to the audience and God and myself, like, I don't know if she had mold illness. What I do know, is we lived in an old, water damaged, musty home. I know that, there was a time we were giving her baby a bath and the bathtub overflowed and, flooded, and we didn't do anything about it other than dry it up, mop it up kind of thing. And I think there were a lot of other factors too. Like, she did have a lot of unresolved childhood trauma. She was a cheerleader and stunter, so she had been dropped on her head too many times. So, I mean, this is, as I'm sure you can appreciate, because you're familiar with me and my work, that's kind of how I got this sort of, multidisciplinary style, is like, I see how, the TBI and concussion, how the trauma, how the mold, how all these different factors just overload the system. So that's what got me into the mold thing. And I got like way down that rabbit hole, way like niche down. I lived and breathed mold from like, kind of like 2016 until 2020. It was like all I was studying, talking about, working with. And then I kind of got to the point I was a little bit burnout working with people that think they have mold illness. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Hard thing to figure out because it's so nebulous and mysterious, but that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah. What are some, I mean, so you pivoted from mold and you went more into like the coaching for the practitioners, and like health coaches, or did you switch niches, if you will?
Yeah, essentially, I got to the point because I was super nestled into the complex chronic illness, the Lyme, the mold, all that kind of stuff. And, it kind of makes me think of like, with wrestling, they always say like, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy is what they say. And, it's a hard sport. I kind of feel that way with like Lyme and mold. Like if you can get good at helping clients or patients with Lyme and mold, everything else is like kind of easy in comparison. So I was really deep into that world and I got a little bit burnt out, and I developed a course that was like mold, microbes, methylation, trying to advance some of the work that was being done in that space. And that kind of segued me into like, all right, hang on, what am I even doing here from like business and branding? So I zoomed out and like, well, I really care about functional medicine for mental health. Mm-hmm. And it's just like mold is just one of the major root cause factors that needed a lot more awareness and help.
Yeah. And mold is hard. I mean, if you're a doc who's like listening to this podcast, it's, and I would assume you felt this way too. Like I'm an empath just in general. So like when you go through this, and I nickname mold the number one home wrecker because it destroys your home, but it usually destroys relationships too, because one person will have the symptoms and usually the other person doesn't, or their symptoms are subclinical. You don't really notice them. And then they badger back and forth and it tears them apart. So that when you're an empath and you're dealing with that day in and day out, it's super heavy stuff. And then you have the people who are like, oh, just a little bit of mold is fine. Like, oh, just because, like I had a patient this week who had mold growing on their shoes and she's pregnant right now. And I'm like, you got mold on the shoes? She's like, oh yeah. And we got mold down in the basement and we have an unfinished basement with a wall that doesn't even have cinder block. And I'm like, good God. Like the amount of mold that is out there is just omnipresent. And it is true. Pretty much everything else after tackling mold and Lyme is incredibly easy. At least I guess to us, it is.
Yeah. Comparatively from just kind of a work with ability,
Yeah. So with the mental health side of things, you created the functional mental health practitioner program, certificate program. What do you typically dive into with that? So somebody's like, well, I think I might want to take that course. What all does that entail?
Yeah, the way, what's so cool about that whole program and business model is like it was such an organic evolution. I was contracted by a medical laboratory where essentially what they were looking to me to was to help advance the research around the core marker that their laboratory measures and offers. So I kind of took this existing, clinical biomarker model of maybe like 6, 7 different biomarkers. And I was like, well, if you're trying to learn more about these, what we really need to do is measure those in relation to all these other well-established clinical biomarkers. So that developed, basically a research panel that then became the mental map, which is the panel that I created. And so I took kind of bits and pieces from different models. Like there's this guy, William Walsh, who did a lot of work with cryptopyral disorder. I took some of his work. I took some of like the SIRS, biomarkers, the MMP9 and C4A, because I think there's value to some of those, and then combined it with a lot of other things. And so, this mental map panel really became the foundation of my certificate program, where, something I preach a lot is we need to be tracking physiology more than we're chasing root causes. I think one of the biggest issues I see in the functional medicine space is everybody's very excited, but also very confused. And it's a lot of like, test this, test that, test this, test that, throw spaghetti out the wall, try this protocol, try that protocol. Well, there's not enough like tracking the physiology, tracking the established clinical biomarkers to see like, but did we ever actually resolve and fix this issue or this issue or this issue? And it's like, if you're not reassessing the physiology and the well-studied, well-validated biomarkers, we don't even know, like, did the protocol objectively work, right? Because if you're just listening to symptoms and whatever, that's so unreliable.
Yeah.
So in the FMHP program, I try to create, a strong structure that's evidence-based, objective clinical biomarkers. And then we're going into all the root cause factors that would disturb that physiology, gut-brain axis, mold, methylation, organic acid testing, stealth infections, psychedelics. So it's, I think, a pretty unique curriculum that is very much, advanced functional medicine for mental health.
Yeah, I think it's like functional medicine 2.0 in a way, because even still, like a lot of the functional medicine practitioners that I'm aware of and I know and I listen to, a lot of them still have like what you said is like, do this protocol, do this test, and that's it. And they don't necessarily test the biomarkers, or they're quick to throw a medication at it instead of fixing the root cause or find out why the body has responded the way that it was. And there's a guy I interviewed on here. His name is Stephen Jaggers. He's a somatic breathwork trainer and specialist. And he was talking about like a lot of our symptoms nowadays, we treat them as though they are abnormal, but our bodies are not meant to handle these stressors. And so what our body does, whether it's pain or anxiety or depression, is trying to yell at us to say, hey, you're in an environment that makes me feel unsafe for whatever the reason is. So once you admit, hey, that's a normal response, then you correct the environment and then the response ceases to exist. So there's multiple levels to this. And I love that you've been able to kind of bring that all together. What would you say some of your favorite biomarkers are to have tested and tracked?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of them, and they keep rolling out new ones all the time. But some of the markers that I would say I'm most interested in, neurofilament light chains, probably number one, which is the gold standard for neurodegeneration. It's been more historically the past like 10, 20 years studied mostly for multiple sclerosis. Now it's being expanded to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and even depression. But it's a really cool biomarker because it's literally a protein released from brain cells that are being damaged that we're measuring in the blood, right? So it's something that we can measure on, phlebotomy blood draw that's really reflective of how much neurodegeneration, neuroinflammation is going on up there. So it's, whereas like creatine kinase, that's muscle turnover and muscle degeneration. Now we have one for the brain. It's kind of like, troponin for cardiovascular, cardiomyocyte, turnover, same idea. So that's number one. A marker called neoterin is another one that I love, can be measured in blood, urine, cerebrospinal fluid. But it's a really, really sensitive marker of immune activation, specifically macrophages and microglial cells. And there's a lot of cool kind of biochemistry behind that one with how, as it goes up and up and up, it's depleting some of our neurotransmitters and causing a lot of other issues. Some of the others, homocysteine, classic, but always awesome, super clinically relevant for mental health, myeloperoxidase, quinolinic acid, the list goes on. But I think it's just so exciting. I see it as my job to educate and empower people so that they can make their own informed decisions, and giving them the tools that takes the guesswork out of it, right? I think there's nothing worse than it's like you're surrendering your power to a doctor, a coach, or a practitioner because you don't know any better. And it's like, there's so many cool tools and biomarkers. We don't have to guess, and we can track these things like to rule in or rule out, because I just see so many functional medicine clients, patients, consumers. It's just like they're so overwhelmed and confused, and they've tried everything, and they're just like burning through practitioner after practitioner. And it's like, but track the data, use the right biomarkers for the job, so you really know what's going on in there.
Well, I'd like to ask the question. I usually save it more towards the end, but if you were to say like, because I have my own yearly physical test that I do for myself, and I say, hey, this is what I suggest for like a yearly physical. But if somebody were to do a yearly physical, or they've never done a yearly physical, what would you suggest for them to do and track?
Yeah, it's something I advise a lot on because, I think it's weird where you look at the functional medicine space and it's like, urine hormones and PCR stool testing and HTMA is like used abundantly. And I think those are not super well, like clinically validated, technologies and clinically significant. Whereas like, your basic blood work that you would get through your doctor, and everybody's, sick of hearing like, oh, your blood work looks normal, there's nothing wrong with you. And we talk about, medical functional ranges. But, everybody should be getting at least once, if not twice a year, that basic workup with the full comprehensive metabolic panel, lipids, iron plus ferritin panel, CBC, 25 hydroxy D3, C-reactive protein, homocysteine. And then, I mean, from there, it's like you can really tailor it based on, the unique health struggle. Like, if you're struggling with GI or endocrine issues or whatever, just adding on from there. But, even just that, even what I described is beyond the basic blood work that they're going to routine and bill through insurance. But still, that's only like $100, maybe $150 of blood work. And that's going to give you more, sound data that you can track than, a $500 stool test or $400 organic acids or something like that.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was going to say too. The CBC, CMP, and like that blood work, it's some of the cheapest blood work that you can actually get done. So it's nice. Yep. And especially with the rising prices of tests, I'm sure you've seen it too. These test companies are just raising the crap out of their prices. Like, good Lord. But I love that. And then being able to, try something, stick to it, and then give it 3 months, give it 6 months or so, and then go and get retested. And we're fortunate that around us, even if you don't have a clinical person you can go to, you can find tests online to run. But then we have any lab tests now that are like super easy, super good. They run like access panels, Vibrant as well. But they have a lot of access to these particular panels and markers that you can build and customize on your own to be able to get these markers done. So you don't even have to spend any money to come and see us if you don't want to. And then if you need further in depth, if everything is just completely Christmas lights on your test, then you may need somebody to decipher that for you. And that's where we come into play ultimately.
Absolutely. And that's how it should be. People should have access to the tools that they need to maintain health sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm trying to figure out where we want to go next, because there's so many things. There's so many things here. Are there things that you want to dive into? I've got 2 more things that I'm thinking in my head, but is there something you want to dive into?
Are you thinking psychedelics?
One of them is psychedelics, yeah.
It kind of pops in my head too. I'm like, oh, we talked about mold and lab, wherever you want to go.
Yeah. Let's go psychedelics. So I've noticed, and for anybody who follows you, if they're not already, definitely go and follow. But you make a lot of posts about like the psychedelics, the psilocybin, and the impact that it has on mental health. Where did that come into play for you? Where did that jump into your brain?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's so crazy to see how society has shifted quite a bit, even just within the past like 10, 15 years, because it's like, I remember being, 18, 19, 20, where it's like, okay, the thing that you're supposed to do is just get shit faced and drink a lot of alcohol and whatever. And I just never could get into it. I've never really liked alcohol, and that's the default. It's so heavily ingrained into our society. It's pushed at us. It's propagandized towards us. And it's like when you really dig into the science of alcohol, it is very toxic and poisonous to the body. There's really, I recently saw one study that was a rat model, and they were postulating that low dose ethanol consumption could possibly alleviate like rheumatoid arthritis and joint inflammation through raising like acetate production through the microbiome. So like, aside from this like one random rat study, I don't think you can find a lick of evidence that says like alcohol is physiologically healthy. The only argument that you can really say would be the psycho-emotional benefit of having fun, letting loose might be worth the temporary toxicity.
Sure.
My point being, alcohol is pretty much just poison, right?
Yeah.
It's a depressant, it downregulates NMDA receptors, it's more addictive. For me, cannabis was my drug of choice, in my early 20s and even still to this day, and the psychoactive properties of, the creative thinking and kind of the flow state that you can get in. So I was kind of, and they always say it's a good gateway drug. So then before you know it, it's like I get introduced to LSD. So LSD was my first psychedelic experience, and I loved it. It was, it was profound. It was powerful. It was like, as soon as I did LSD for the first time, I was like, everything that like I intuitively believed to be true about existential reality it is true, right?
Mhm.
This like bullshit fear and ego game that we all play as we part idle dance, that's not reality. None of that actually matters. There's so much more going on energetically in the universe. Love is the most abundant frequency. It's all around us all the time. It's just, are we able to tap into it, or
Yeah.
are we letting our lizard brain ego just get clouded by societal indulgence? So LSD kind of sent me into the psychedelic realm. And so then, started experimenting with LSD and psilocybin, MDMA, and it's become a huge area of passion for me, because whether we're looking at psychedelics through the lens of societal spiritual evolution and growth, or we're looking at more of just a pharmacology of like the mechanisms of action of these psychedelic compounds and the physiological effects in the body and the brain, either way, these are compounds that we should embrace, because it's going to revolutionize mental health care. It already is.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it was big back in, I think, the 60s and 70s. They were doing tests on LSD and psilocybin, and then it disappeared for a while. It got like shamed and buried.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden there was a resurgence, as if it was like time. And then now there's documentaries and stuff coming out. There's more research that's coming out on it. And some of the research from back in the 70s is coming out. Like, this stuff was doing good for us back then. Why the hell did it get buried? We could probably answer that question quite easily, but I think it's amazing to see somebody like you to be able to kind of be in the research side of things and bring research and, I don't want to say recreational, but bring them kind of both together. Where, like, you should have access to this, and then this is how you're able to kind of implement this. But what are some of the things that you see and help people with in the mental health space with the psychedelics?
Yeah, I put up a post probably a few weeks ago, and it was probably one of my favorite posts that I've ever put up. And I wrote, psychedelics won't save you from all of your problems, but they might give you the clarity to save you from yourself, kind of thing. And I thought I kind of nailed it with that one, because we are seeing this sort of rush and craze as, people are like, what are these psychedelic things? And like, if I just go do ceremony in, the rainforest, will I be absolved of all of my self-indulgence, shame and whatever? So there is this psychedelic rush. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm getting more and more people starting to reach out that like they were not at all ready to be thrust into the psychedelic realm and have all of their shit that is stored deep in their cells and psyche just like blasted in their face. So they have this like horrible trip that sends them into a, existential crisis that they can't come back from. Yeah. Right. And it's like, okay, well, that's not a good way to go about it. But from more of a physiological effect perspective, these psychedelics seem, based on the current evidence, to be very anti-inflammatory, to be immunomodulatory, to promote. Actually, this art piece right behind me is called neurogenesis. This is a bunch of mushrooms and got a brain and neurons up here, and it's just all awesome. Artistically trying to, illustrate how these psychedelics seem to light up a bunch of different brain regions and increase the brain's ability to heal itself, essentially, and of course create new neural pathways. And I think it allows us to really step outside of our ego and see our life and see our participation in the universe a little bit more objectively. So there's a lot of really exciting healing properties, but I think we're in this interesting spot now. The legality, obviously, the political and corporate corruption of, like you mentioned, you kind of alluded to it earlier, and I was thinking about, synthetic psilocybin is becoming the big thing. And,
oh, really? I didn't know that they created that.
Yeah.
That's always my biggest fear, man. Like when they study these organic compounds, I'm like, shit, like now they're going to turn it into a fucking medication and corner the market and ban the natural.
Exactly. And that's kind of already going on. And I'm a little nervous to see how it plays out, because I don't know. I mean, Pandora's box is blown wide open. So I think, these compounds should be embraced. They should be regulated, but I think we should all be able to have access.
Yeah.
in my opinion, and I'm sure some will disagree, but you go to like Mexico or Egypt, there's a pharmacy on every corner and you could buy like any medication anywhere. They give the people direct access to medicine. And it's like, okay, is that going to cause more accidental drug overdose and addiction? Probably, but at least you're not restricting access to something that some people might be able to need, rather than jumping through all the bullshit hoops of the conventional medical models. So I hope that, natural psilocybin comes down the cannabis dispensary infrastructure. LSD, MDMA, ketamine therapy is booming right now. So we'll see, but I think it's very important that people gain the education of doing the work before just blasting their brains with psychedelics, right? I think people should really get themselves to a good place psychologically and physiologically before they dip their toes into that realm.
So I think that's really wise of you to say there too. I've had patients who knew something was wrong, something internally, something's going on, and then they go and they get, in a way, they get addicted to the compound, and they'll have a problem that comes up and they're like, oh shit, I've got a problem. They'll rebury it again, take the drug again, bring it back up again, bury it again, and they just keep going on this cycle. And then eventually that one thing that comes up turns into 2, then turns into 3, then turns into 4. And then they're like, oh my God, like my life sucks. I'm going to divorce my husband, or I'm going to leave my wife. I hate my kids and I don't know what's going on. It's like they uncover too much and they don't put the work in afterwards. And I think that that's such a crucial piece, is like this integration piece. Do the work, prep yourself beforehand, and then afterwards sit with what you found, what came to you, and figure out how you're going to move forward in life now that you have that new realization of whatever that trauma may have been. Do you find that a lot too?
Yeah, for sure. Fortunately, I mean, you look at psilocybin, LSD as probably the best examples. They're really doing a lot of research for, like, I think the clinical application is endless, right? Trauma, depression, neurodegeneration, autoimmunity. I think these substances applied as therapeutics have kind of infinite clinical application. There's going to be the areas that they shine the most, like PTSD, neurodegeneration, neuroinflammatory diseases. But addiction is where I was going with that, is even, like alcoholism. There's clinical trials going on of using psilocybin to treat alcoholism, right? Okay. And so my point being, fortunately, these compounds are really not addictive. I'm sure anything's possible, but like by nature, they're not addictive substances, and they actually seem to be good treatments for addiction. And from just an anecdotal perspective, I wouldn't describe psychedelics as fun. Like, I wouldn't describe it as a fun experience. Is it powerful? Yes. Is it emotional? Yes. Is it enlightening? Is it expansive? Is it stimulating? Is it euphoric? Yes. Is it fun? No, not really. Like, it's not like, oh, I just want to let loose and have a good weekend. I'm going to drop some acid. It's like, no, I'm going to be thinking about everything that needs to be processed. It's like a soul detoxification. So very powerful.
Yeah. And if I messed up and said the addictive piece of it, I wasn't calling the compounds per se addictive. It's like the, with where we are, like Phoenix and all that, we're energy centers, Sedona's up north and stuff. So like these people are coming in and they're telling everyone to get on, like, do this plant medicine, do ayahuasca. Like, I know people who were doing ayahuasca every month, combo every month. I'm like, what the fuck are you, like, what are you doing? And there's a level of, like, when you have a codependency or you need to gain significance through experience, the more you talk about, oh, I'm going to be dropping acid, or I'm going to do mushrooms this weekend, I'm going to work with some psilocybin. It's like you're getting a dose of significance every single time that you do that, but you're not putting the work in. And then it turns into what? Oh shit, I've had ignored my problems for too long. The significance is no longer there. And now I have to face down the barrel of all of my trauma that I refuse to address. That's what I see. And it's stressful to see it.
100%. It does get to a point that you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like maybe your first couple experiences, it's just like, holy shit, there's this whole other, dimension of reality that maybe I intuitively hoped existed, but I didn't rationally, logically know it did. But I think some of these people, if they're really hoping that, the substance is just going to like be a cure-all and make all their problems go away, and they just keep blasting and keep going into it, like eventually there's no more. You're at the bottom of the barrel at some point. Yeah, the integration work. And so for me, the way I kind of think about it, it's like there's more of our sober and generally egocentric amygdala overdrive kind of way of living, and then there's sort of our intrinsic divine truth and intuition. And it's like the psychedelics help you get to there. The integration work though starts overlaying those planes. And so even for myself, I don't do psychedelics like super often or anything, but it's like when I start feeling like I'm not as aligned, I can feel like the fear, the ego has sort of crept back in a little bit. I'm a little bit out of alignment. I'm not enjoying my sentience and reality as much. Doing a little bit of psychedelic, it kind of gets me realigned again. And I think you will know that you're doing the work the right way when you're able to go into a psychedelic experience. And sure, you're going to be high on the substance. You're going to have the euphoric, manic effect. But when your psychology is the same when you're sober versus on the plant medicine or psychedelic, I think that tells you that you're doing the work and you're living in alignment. I think your way of thinking and your psychology should be the same, whether you're sober or high on 4 grams of mushrooms. And if that's not happening, it's like totally different realities. I think that shows the distance that is what you have to close through the integration work.
Okay, that's a great analogy there too. No one's ever said that way. That's great. Awesome. So with the psychedelics, how do you coach people then on like how to do it appropriately themselves, microdosing, or do you just kind of educate them? Like how do you help people in the psychedelic realm?
Yeah, all the consulting I do, it's all just very much, meeting them where they're at. Above all else, holding space and just being empathetic. Like my goal with every single appointment, no matter who they are or what they're coming to me for, I just want them walking away from the appointment feeling better, feeling lighter, feeling like they're, heard and seen and empowered and loved and respected. But yes, obviously I get a lot of people, whether it's they're wanting to do hormone replacement therapy and they want to do it right and they need help understanding how do you do it right, or they're starting to dabble with microdosing and psychedelics. I really just educate, guide, try to give them the education on how to structure their experimentation, kind of citizen scientist of if they have the knowledge to be empowered to kind of do their own little micro experiments. Because at the end of the day, we know this as practitioners, as coaches, so clinicians, we can make recommendations so we're blue in the face, but they have to do it. The best thing we can do is educate, empower, and motivational interview them to have them find their own way. Same thing with psychedelics. So, I present options of like, okay, what's resonating? Like a little bit of microdosing versus like trip your balls off. Like, what are you into? So.
Yeah. Awesome. And if you were to say like, who are your ideal like clients, your ideal avatars that you would want to work with for like a one-on-one client?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I always like from more of like a research idealistic perspective, it's like, you take somebody that's metabolically ill, right? Somebody that, gosh, how do I say it in a way that's going to be like appropriate?
Just say
and
it.
Everything.
Just say it.
You're just like, I mean, you're standard American. That's like maybe not fully self-aware. They're metabolically compromised. They're psychologically compromised. Because you just think about like the transformation that they could go through with like a well-designed program. But that's not really actually what I work with. Most of the people that I work with are, individuals that have most of my clients are extremely well educated. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of them are like coaches or practitioners themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, they have a lot of good lifestyle foundations. They do a lot of inner work and therapy, but they're needing help navigating like the clinical nuance. Like that ends up being what I work with the most. And I'm pretty okay with it.
Gotta be good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if people were wanting to reach out for like a one-on-one, or if docs wanted to do some coaching with you and try to learn and educate with you, where would they find you at?
Yeah, best place to find me is on Instagram, the Holistic Savage. That's my main platform. I put everything out there. And, you know, good old Linktree, like websites are obsolete anymore. All you need is a good Linktree, because it's like all of your most important links right there. Yeah. So everything that I have to offer the world is in that Linktree. And if it's not in the Linktree, then I don't offer it to the world.
Pretty simple. Straight to the point. That's awesome.
That way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Yeah. I hope to be able to send, you know, patients to you, docs to you, you know, be able to support you as much as possible. And I pride myself on bringing like more authentic people onto this podcast. And I knew when I met you, I'm like, this dude's legit. And then we started just messaging back and forth. And I'm like, yeah, I got to get this dude on the podcast. So super excited to have you here today. Is there any parting knowledge that you would want to give any of the listeners out there?
You know, as far as trying to help the listeners out, because, you know, we covered a lot of ground, and I deeply recognize just how complicated and confusing and the information overload. But, you know, health and healing is beautifully simple. You know, it is our day-to-day lifestyle choices and foundations, our outlook, all this other detail. It's so complicated. The protocols, the biomarkers, the testing, those are details. That's like 10% of the picture, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you don't need to spend a ton of money to get healthy or heal. You don't even need a gym membership to get fit, right? So it's just the basics of what it means to be human: the sunlight, the sleep, the movement, the laughter, the nutrition. It's beautifully simple. So, you know, don't outsource your health sovereignty. Like, nobody has all the answers. You know, just make sure that you're showing up for yourself. But honestly, it's been a pleasure getting to hang out with you. I definitely will have you on my podcast so we can bro out a second time and riff about everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Next time you're in Phoenix, you have to let me know too. So that way we can at least get a workout in. But
for sure. Yeah. Get a pump on, you know?
Exactly. Then we'll do another podcast episode with a pump. So
we'll look, you know, 10 times more swole.
There you go.